For centuries, natural disasters have plagued mankind. They cause devastating effects and garner global attention. However, these events have lingering effects that the media pays no attention to. But here, years later, we will uncover the economics fallouts of Mother Earth's wrath. This is Macro Mysteries Unmasked. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 1906 is widely seen as one of the most devastating volcanic disasters in recent history. It caused over 100 deaths and buried dozens of towns in the area under lava, ash, and smoke. This was the most cinders and lava that Italy has ever seen come from the volcano. Scenes of misery and terror abounded. Refugees poured into Naples by the thousands. In this segment, we take a look back at how it not only affected the towns buried under the lava, but also at how it affected the numbers that kept the nation of Italy together.
Today we have historian Dr. Chu here to tell us about the effects of this disaster on Italy's national economy.
Yes, so at the turn of the 20th century, Italy was still a relatively new nation, and while it was connected to Western European markets, many northern Italians remained poor and agriculture-based in their livelihoods. With the eruption, the economy clearly was not helped because funds had to be reallocated from the public sector to rebuilding the damaged infrastructure.
So exactly how much did the public sector lose?
Okay, well, since records were not kept as neatly in the 1900s as they are today, we can only estimate the contraction that this caused in the economy. However, most historians and analysts agree that the disaster cost Italy about $50 billion in GDP, adjusted for modern-day inflation and exchange rates.
And didn't I hear something about the Olympics?
Yeah, so Rome was supposed to host the 1908 Summer Olympics 2 years later, but with this natural disaster, Italy had to defer its hosting to London. This cost the national economy about 30% increase in international trade, which is about average for most cities that host the Olympics. Revenues could have reached 30 million US dollars, again adjusted for inflation and exchange, but clearly this never happened.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chu. This has been Mount Vesuvius on Macro Mysteries Unmasked.
On August 29th, 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall east of New Orleans, causing devastating damage. Today, we will revisit the disaster.
But things weren't always like this.
What a sad transformation.
That's right, Cassie. I'm sure many of us are wondering what happened to New Orleans' economy after Katrina.
Good question. Economic expert Siqi Liu is here with us today. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Liu. Can you give us a quick overview on what happened to the New Orleans economy right after the disaster?
Thank you, Cassie. It's a pleasure to be here. To answer your question, 95,000 jobs and $2.9 billion in wages were lost within 10 months after Katrina.
Here's a distribution of the employment loss in some of the key industries. As you can see here, there is a dramatic dip in the employment for all industries. The job losses are due to destruction of infrastructure and homes, as well as the evacuation of many employed citizens in the aftermath of the disaster.
So, has the labor market shown any signs of rebounding?
Actually, yes. The negative fluctuation in the labor market was only short-term. By 2006, the employment level has approached pre-hurricane levels, thanks to government spending.
So, can you break down this government response to the disaster?
Well, you see, Congress enacted 2 appropriation bills that totaled $22.3 billion for recovery efforts. In the short run, the money helped rebuild the infrastructure. In the long run, government spending increases aggregate demand, which lowered prices and stimulated investment. This gave the economy a jump start.
Other factors accounted for the rebound of New Orleans' economy.
Well, the resilience of the labor market is largely due to the strength of New Orleans' three main industries: tourism, post-operations, and educational services. These are known as the three-legged stool of New Orleans' economy, and they have all shown significant signs of recovery.
Well, that's really nice to hear. But let's go back to the immediate after effects of the hurricane. So what were the impacts on the national economy?
Just to put this into perspective, in 2005, the Gulf of Mexico represented 29% of all domestic oil production. The short-term shutdown of oil refineries after the hurricane led to shortages in gas and gas price spikes throughout the country. The rising energy prices decreased aggregate demand, which slowed economic growth in late 2005. But by 2006, government spending and rebuilding actually boosted the economy. GDP actually rocketed at the beginning of 2006.
That's great news to hear. We are finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you again, Dr. Liu.
This was Hurricane Katrina on Macro Mysteries Unmasked.
On March 11, 2011, a 9.0 magnitude undersea earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, causing a massive tsunami. The tsunami caused meltdown explosions of 3 reactors at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, as well as billions of dollars of damage. An estimated 28,000 people were killed, 130,000 houses destroyed. The disaster did not only have a tremendous effect on Japan's economy, but also on the world economy. Today, we will investigate its consequences.
Here we have Dr. Pan, a world-renowned economist who has graciously invited us into her home for this interview. Hi, Dr. Pan. Thank you for inviting us to your home. Today, Dr. Pan will tell us about the economic effects of the Japan tsunami, as well as her rice farming business.
Obviously, the destruction costed a massive amount. The damage cost for Japan is between $100 to $235 billion in U.S. money, higher than Hurricane Katrina's $125 billion of its damage. Japan, being the third largest economy, was beginning to recover from 20 years of deflation and recessions. In order to prevent a financial panic, the Bank of Japan pumped $250 billion into their economy right after the disaster. But still, supplies, chains, trade, and industrial production dropped sharply.
So, what are some statistics of how the GDP was affected?
GDP also decreased from 125 trillion in yen from December 2010 to 115 trillion after the earthquake, around 0.7% contraction. The earthquake caused a damage of $204 billion in capital stock, 4% of Japan's total stock. Surprisingly though, the industrial production didn't decrease, but not as much as it did for Japan in 2009 after the world recession. Bankruptcies increased. Export decreased from 14.5% to 13.3% 2 months after the disaster. But the national unemployment rate surprisingly decreased from 4.6% to 4.1% 6 months later.
So, you've spoken about the Japan economy, but can you explain how this affected the national economy? Okay.
The main impact of the earthquake on the global economy was disruptions to the supply and industrial chain. Greatest interruptions in Asia and the United States, especially with automobiles, telecommunications, and consumer electronics. The tsunami also slowed global growth, especially with global supply of semiconductors, in which Japan supplies 20% of the world's semiconductors, so aggregate demand decreased. 6% of the imports in the U.S. are from Japan, so there was a decrease in imports for the United States as well.
Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Pan. This is the North Japan tsunami on Macro Mysteries Unmasked.
This concludes this week's episode of Macro Mysteries Unmasked.
Tune in next week.